A Google game console sounds a bit crazy, but apparently it's true, and a bunch of sources have been saying that this thing has been in the works for 2 years, and they're codenaming it the Yeti console, and even that Google was at E3 and some other game shows, industry shows, earlier this year, and talking with gaming industry leaders, trying to gauge their interest in a game streaming platform. So that's the main idea behind this. It's not going to be like a regular game console like we got with the Xbox or the PlayStation, but rather it would be mostly focused on streaming the games, like cloud gaming, if you will. Now, that is obviously a very interesting idea, and apparently Google has even been talking with some AAA game studios, we don't know which ones, and thinking about buying them. So it looks like they're not only being very serious about this game console platform, but also looking to potentially create console exclusives for this Google console. And there are some rumors that they are actually pretty far along in this console and that they were even potentially considering releasing the thing in the holiday season of 2017. Now, obviously that didn't happen, and I don't know how serious those plans were or how far back they said, oh, maybe we can launch in 2017. All that obviously didn't happen, so there's probably a much longer time frame on this at this point, especially if they're going to be talking to game developers. It seems like they might have big plans for this. Now, this idea of cloud gaming or game streaming, whatever you want to call it, is not new, and we already have some top tier companies doing it. We got PlayStation Now, we got GeForce Now from Nvidia, we have GameFly streaming. So the idea isn't new, and it really has never been a big competition with local powered consoles like Xbox and PlayStation, especially not PC. So I don't really know what kind of market share Google is expecting with this. And it kind of makes you ask the big question, is game streaming even a viable way of playing your games as a main method of playing your games instead of like something you just kind of do on the side? And I mean, I've never actually done game streaming services before, so I couldn't tell you, but I think theoretically it is pretty sound, believe it or not. If all the conditions are right, it shouldn't be that bad at all. It could be actually very good. Of course, theory and reality are often very, very different, and I definitely can see that the biggest issues, this is not going to be a surprise, would be bandwidth and latency. Now, you might be able to argue that the image quality would be a lot better on like a high power server farm or something as opposed to like a local Xbox or PlayStation, but at the same time, that may be true. You could render it at highest settings, but then you would have to compress it and be able to send it over the internet. So I think that the image quality isn't going to be able to beat that out because you're really going to have to compress it, especially since most people these days don't really have super fast internet to consistently stream that much. And then when you throw on top of that bandwidth caps, it just gets even worse. And with latency, there's a lot you have to solve. I mean, you have to make an input on the controller, it has to go over the internet, render on the server farm, and then send it back to the console. That could potentially be a lot of latency if things aren't perfect. And obviously, if you try to compare this with something like a PC where you have performance hardware and low latency mouse and keyboard and all that stuff and a high refresh rate monitor with low latency between the gray to gray response time, there's not going to be any competition, but I really don't think that that's what they're going for. This is probably definitely going to compete with the home console like Xbox and PlayStation, not PC. It might have the option to stream from a PC if you have like a really weak hardware, but I really don't think that's going to be their main demographic. But if you think about it, this whole latency thing might not be as bad as you're imagining it, because a console game is typically going to have a frame rate cap of 60 frames a second tops. I mean, a lot of TVs don't even support over 60 frames a second. So a 60 frame refresh rate is going to have an individual delay between each frame of 16 milliseconds. If it's 30 frames a second on that game, that is going to be 33 milliseconds. So that means that you wouldn't even notice any latency if going both ways, it was an 8 millisecond latency from your controller to the server farm, 8 milliseconds, and then another 8 milliseconds going back. That would all happen between frames refreshing on your TV. Now, obviously, that's completely ignoring the time that would happen on the server farm, but presumably that would be almost negligible, or at least not too high, or perhaps You know, if they could really get the latency down through like local server farms around the country, then they would have a little bit more time. But still, I really do think it could be done. Of course, all that would be with ideal conditions, which we know when it comes to internet service providers, things aren't always ideal when it comes to your internet connection, not usually at all. So it's probably not going to be ideal, and I could definitely see that being a big issue. It's probably the biggest issue would be latency. It'd be interesting to see how Google can maybe negotiate with these ISPs, be like, hey, we want to make a deal with you where our service gets lower latency. Of course, the whole problem with net neutrality comes in, and that's a whole nother video. But still, I think it could be done. Probably not going to be anytime soon, though, to be really honest. And kind of going further into my thoughts, one thing I want to think about is, would this even be worth it? I mean, it would have to be a very, very low price. Think about it. So say it's going to be like a $15 a month subscription fee. Of course there's going to be a subscription fee because there always is these days. And then say you buy the thing, so it'd be a console plus a controller, probably going to run you like $100. So that's $250 the first year. You're already halfway to an Xbox One X, which is the most powerful brand new console on the market. Or you could get an Xbox One S, which is pretty darn good in itself and could do 4K HDR for the same price. So it's like, why would people buy something that is going to be like cloud-based gaming when they could just get an Xbox? Though another plus for the streaming would be that presumably if you have this subscription fee, then you wouldn't have to go and buy individual games because they would all be included in the subscription. They would have to do that. That would be absolutely essential, and I think they probably would do that, but if they didn't, I mean, it would just kill the game. I also think if they're gonna do something like this, they would have to really make it not just a game console. I think that would not be enough for enough people to switch from like Xbox or PlayStation. I think they would have to make it do a lot more. Maybe like an Android TV where you can install apps on it and have it control smart home, or I don't know, do all sorts of stuff that I haven't even imagined. That's up to Google to make it worthwhile and add features. But there was also even talks that potentially they would even be using like existing Chromecast features to stream on this. I don't know how realistic that would be. They would probably have to sell a totally new Chromecast device. But I mean, how much was the Chromecast Ultra? It was like $50 to $100. I definitely think that if they're going to be doing this game streaming thing, it's going to be more than that. So I don't think they're going to get it below a price that would be really realistic. And we know that Google, they tend to half-ass a lot of their projects. I mean, you got YouTube streaming. So no one really uses it compared to Twitch, even though they launched all their resources at it. And apparently this streaming console would somehow be integrated with YouTube in some way. I don't really buy that. You also look at stuff like their on-hub router, which never really took off. Apparently it wasn't even that good. So I don't really have that much confidence in Google to launch something that is able to compete with Microsoft and Sony, who have been doing this a heck of a lot longer and have pretty much optimized their consoles to the death. I just don't see what they could do different compared to like GeForce Now or PlayStation Now, who already have a lockdown on the market, and PlayStation has their console too. I mean, what are they going to offer besides that? So, I don't know. It's just going to be mediocre. I can just see it now. I hope I'm wrong. I just think it's going to flop if they release it anytime soon, if it's not going to be like zero latency, which obviously is impossible. But anyway, you guys can let me know what you think. Would you buy a Google game console that does streaming? I don't know. I probably would not, unless it had some amazing feature that I can't even conceive of. We'll have to see. If you want to keep watching, I'll put some other videos right here. You know the deal. You can click on it if you want to subscribe. Yada, yada, yada. Have a good one.